Thanks for checking this out. I'm Ron Warren, and as you hear, I play Native American flutes, and was supposed to be in Nebraska this month doing some concerts and workshops, but of course that's not happening, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to start working on a series of videos about the flute. I've been wanting to do this for a while anyway, to talk about how I think about the flute and ways that we can look for paths forward with the flute. So this is kind of targeted maybe at those of you who have been playing for a while and you're looking for ways to break out and try something different. But if you're new to the flute, you can kind of jump into, because there'll be plenty of stuff to help you get going as we go along. Now, for this entire series, I'm going to be using mainly this flute. This flute was made for me by Colin Peterson at woodlandvoices.com, and it's pitched on A. That simply means that the bottom note it plays is fairly close to concert A, as it's defined in Western music. Now, of course, that's not a traditional concept. This is very much something that's been laid on to more modern Native American style flutes. We'll talk about a lot of those issues as we go along. Also, for this series of videos, I'm just going to be playing the sound. You'll just hear raw native flute sound. This isn't going to be studio processed at all. It's just whatever's coming out of the flute and into the little iPad that we're using here for recording. I think it's really important as you develop your sound to hear what's actually coming out of the flute and not run your flute through a microphone with a lot of verb and stuff on it right away. You need to establish that good basic sound first, and then you can kind of add that for some sweetening later if you want to. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Actually, I'd like to start with a quick story. It's one of the nicest things that's ever been said to me about my flute playing. We were in Bermuda at a native gathering in Bermuda. We don't normally think of, indigenous Americans necessarily being in Bermuda, but there are many, many people from the Eastern cultures whose ancestors were taken there as slaves back in the day by the English, and they are still there, and the communities are very active and do a lot of interesting programming, and Janice and I had been invited to go there to take part in a gathering. And as you do at a gathering, I was going around introducing myself and greeting people who had come, many of them had come from a long way to be there. And I was talking with an elder Wampanoag woman, and she said to me, you play the flute differently than I've ever heard before. Please keep doing that. Now, the reason that really warmed my heart to hear that is that the woman had recognized something in my playing that was moving the flute to a different place maybe than it had been before, which I think is a really, really important thing. If we simply buy into the stereotypes that have been taught to us about what Native American music is supposed to sound like, or what Native American flutes are supposed to be able to do or are not able to do, or whatever, then really the cultures become frozen. We just become museum artifacts. So for our cultures to remain living and growing, we need to be looking for that path forward all the time. We need to be responding to the situations and the times and places that we find ourselves in now, rather than participating in the dominant culture's efforts to keep us disappeared and in the past. When we're playing at powwows or a place like that, I will almost always say, as I'm finishing up a set, I'll say, come on by the tent and hang out with us for a while, because I really enjoy talking with people about flutes. And if you have a flute, bring it along. We can even jam together. That'd be a good time. And so people always come by, and we start to chat, and usually they'll say really kind things like, enjoyed your playing. You do some really unusual and interesting things with the flute. And then that oftentimes is followed up with the person saying something along the lines of, I get frustrated with my own playing. I feel like everything I do sounds the same every day. Why do all my songs sound alike? And as we start to explore that a little bit together, what usually comes out is that the person has bought into some of the stereotyped things they've heard about the flute being a very, very limited musical instrument. One of the most common things I hear is, well, you know, the flute is really just a pentatonic instrument, so how many things can you do with it? Now, musicians out there know that pentatonic simply means 5 notes, right? So count with me as I go up what a lot of modern players call basic scale on the flute. That gets us to 5. Now the top note of basic scale is this. And for musical purposes, we consider that top note to be the same as the bottom note. All right, on this flute that I'm playing, the bottom note is the musical pitch A. It's been given the name A by Western musicians. The top note is also called A. We'll get into why that is in much more detail later. It's not important for now. All right, now count with me this time also. I played a lot more than 5 notes going from A to A that time. And if I had chosen to, I could have played many, many more as well. The flute, in fact, is capable of playing many, many more than 5 notes. And that's something we will explore again in detail as we get further down this path together. A lot of the limitations that people put on the flute have to do with stereotyped understandings about native flute, native music making, and native cultures in general. I once had a classical pianist asked if he could see my flutes, and so I pulled a flute out and showed it to him, and his response is, wow, they must be really easy to play. Right now, this guy's a classical pianist, and his instrument, the grand piano, is a tremendous mechanical beast. Right? You look inside of the thing, and there are heavy manufactured metal bits, different kinds of woods, other kinds of materials, hundreds of moving parts, dozens of strings. It can play lots of notes at the same time. It can play very quietly. It can play very loudly. It can do all kinds of things. My little flute, by contrast, is basically a hollowed out piece of wood with some extra holes stuck in it. Right? No moving parts, no metal, all handmade, no manufactured bits. How could it possibly do anything sophisticated or complicated like a great grand piano? Okay, so on the surface, certainly it appears that a grand piano is a much more complicated instrument than a native flute, and therefore you might think that the piano can obviously do much more complicated and sophisticated music than a native flute. But let's go beneath the surface a little bit and see if that's entirely accurate. Now, alas, in order to go beneath the surface, we're going to have to talk about vocabulary a little bit. Music, like any other discipline, has a jargon that's kind of built up around it, and it's not to make it obscure or difficult or anything like that. It's just that we need to communicate clearly and effectively, and so we kind of have to agree about what we mean by words when we say them. So the first word we're going to start with is frequency. When we hear a pitch in our ears, it sounds like a musical note in our ears, it's because something has set a sound wave in motion that has traveled through the air, and it's hitting our ear in a particularly regular way. Right? That's an oversimplification, but it's all we need for now. So when I play this bottom note on my Colin Peterson flute medium A, and it's tuned pretty much to Western classical A concept, you'll hear classical musicians, at least in the United States, say, hey, let's tune to A440. And what that means is that in that system of music making, the pitch A is defined as a sound wave that is hitting your ear 440 times a second. Now, human hearing ranges from about 16, 17 cycles per second, all the way up to 17 to 20,000 cycles. Some people can even hear a little bit higher than that. Unfortunately, as we age, our high frequency hearing tends to roll off. So most of you who are watching this can probably hear higher sounds than I can at this point, especially after some of the abuse my ears have taken along the way. All right, so a vast range of frequencies, an infinite range of frequencies, because for any two frequencies you can think of, say between 440 and 441, there's going to be something vibrating 440.5 times a second, and so on. So you can easily imagine a continuum that is an infinite number of frequencies. So it's really the relationships between the frequencies that become important for musical cultures as they develop. The most basic one we've already talked about a little bit, A, right? This is a very, very important relationship. Probably grows out of biological reality. If you have a group of men and women singing together and they're all singing the same song, we agree that they're all singing the same melody, but the notes that most of the women will be singing will actually be vibrating twice as fast as the notes that most of the men are singing. So that basic ratio of 2 to 1 is a very, very important one for musicians. Musicians use the term octave equivalence to describe that, right? So A is A. This A, the bottom A, 440 cycles per second. This top A, 880 cycles per second, right? So basic concept, okay? Now, we can also, within this scope of frequencies, we can look at individual instruments and say, well, this instrument plays a wider range of frequencies than another instrument. Grand piano, for example, if you look at it, it has 88 keys, and some of those are very, very low notes, and some of them are very, very high notes. My flute can't play anywhere near that wider range of frequencies. If piano range is like this, my flute range is about like this. Okay, so again, it would appear that the piano has many, many more possibilities. But consider this, a piano has keys for a reason, right? Pianos are designed to really nail very, very specific frequencies. They don't care about all of the frequencies in between. A piano, modern grand pianos, most of them have 88 keys, each of which is tuned to an individual frequency, so that a piano is able to play 88 discrete frequencies, right? But my flute can do things like this. In musical terms, I just slid from the pitch D to the pitch E. And instead of just moving from one to the other, like a piano can do, I hit everything in between. Now, an app that I would highly recommend for your phone, if you have a chance to get it, is called ClearTune. Last time I checked, it's still available at the App Store for Apple. And ClearTune is a tuner. It will show you what frequencies you're playing. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to put a little screenshot here of ClearTune, right? And first, I'm going to just play from D to E very discreetly, just like a piano does. And I'm kind of eyeing the tuner over there to make sure I'm kind of close to the pitches I'm after. All right, so you saw the tuner flip really quickly. It went from D to E. That's what a piano is really, really good at doing. All right, now I'm going to do what my flute is really, really good at doing. So as you saw, the tuner now, instead of just jumping from D to E, it gradually slid from D to E. And what you saw was every single frequency sounding between D and E. The piano doesn't have any of those frequencies available to it. In other words, my wee little flute can play many, many, many more frequencies than a grand piano. I have many, many more opportunities for exploring pitch relationships than a modern grand piano. If I'm willing to break out of that box of, oh, the flute is a very limited and simple instrument. Right now, this tells me a couple of things. One, infinity can exist in a very, very small space, if you want to think about it in those terms. But also, think of the world of possibilities, even what looks like a simple instrument. Think of the world of possibilities it has if you're willing to listen to its capabilities instead of allowing it to be placed in a box. Here's some other things that my flute can do that a piano cannot. Now, I don't know how well that read on the little microphone I have in the iPad here, but I started a note very quietly and made it get louder as it went. Pianos can't do that. When you push a key down on a piano, that's as loud as it's going to get. And the only option it has after that is to continually get quieter until the sound disappears or until you let go of the key, in which case the sound stops immediately. Right? Those are the dynamic envelopes, to use a technical term, that a piano has available to it. One, all on, and then it starts to disappear. My flute has such a wide range of dynamic envelopes available. It can start quiet and get louder. It can start loud and get gradually quieter and then get loud again. It's simply a matter of allowing your ear and your imagination to explore those possibilities. Right now, so think about, listen very, very carefully and see how many things you can hear going on in this little musical idea that I'm going to play. So I made a sound grow in dynamic volume. I made it fade in dynamic volume. I bent pitches. I slid through frequencies that are not available on a piano. I added air to my sound that a piano can't do. All right? So if you were to try to put that into Western music notation, one of the issues you'll have is that Western music notation is not designed to communicate the kinds of things I just did. So a lot of people, when they transcribe native flute music into Western notation, it ends up looking very simple or even simple-minded on the page. But that's about the limitation of the notation system, not of what we're actually doing. Right? If you had a way to notate everything that I just played, it would look extremely complicated on the page. Right? It's just that Western music notation doesn't really have the means for accurately notating what's going on. All right, so that was just one brief example of how we can start thinking beneath the surface of things. And as we move along, we're going to explore a lot of different things like that together. You know, like even, okay, here's all the possible frequencies in the world. How do different musical cultures select between those frequencies and create things like scales and modes? Because music is a cultural construct, and each culture decides for itself what its music making needs to be like. So how are we going to make our way down this path? You'll forgive me if I look down at notes occasionally here. I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. I'm kind of thinking of this in terms of 4 different kinds of videos as we move along. One is pretty much like what we're doing today. It'll be more extended, be more conversational. It will focus more on concept and culture and ways of thinking that might help us to grow in our flute playing. Then there'll be some videos that I'm thinking of as technique and vocabulary building, where we'll just focus in on very, very specific things that I think are kind of foundational or help us grow our flute playing vocabulary. How do you do this? What are some ways you can practice it? What are some ways you can put it into your music making? Then there'll be some little quick hit videos that are just, hey, basically, let's practice together. Here's how I like to practice my tonguing. Here's how I like to warm up in the morning, get the breathing going and get the fingers going and all of that kind of stuff. So quick little hit things. Here's some basic scale patterns. I'll play it. Can you play it back? Are your ears keeping up with your fingers? Those kinds of things. You can come back to them over and over again if you need, or you can just do them once and be done with it. And then about once a week, I'm hoping to do an Instagram Live that will basically be an opportunity for us to play together, practice together, answer any questions you might have. So if you do have questions, or if you have very specific things you'd like for me to talk about, please list them in the comments below, and I'll try to get to them as we move along. All right, now the next little set of videos that's going to be coming along is going to be focusing on what I think of as kind of core basic techniques. So if you're new to the flute and want to get started, that's a great place to start. We'll be talking about the most essential basic scale patterns, how do you get your tongue engaged, all that kind of stuff. Now, even if you're, if you've been playing flute for a while, I think it'd be useful to watch these. One, review never hurts anything. Two, I may think about things a little bit differently than you do. Might be some insights there that are useful for you. Maybe most importantly, though, is we'll kind of establish that we're using the same words to mean the same thing. I might say things differently than you do, or that you're accustomed to, and it'll make things much easier down the road if we're kind of speaking the same language and we have an agreed vocabulary that we're working from. So that's what's coming up next, and if you are interested in hearing some of my music, there are links below where you can do that. And again, if you're interested in checking out some of Colin's flutes, there's a link below for that also. Thank you so much for checking this out and starting this path, and I hope that we'll have a really productive time together. And I hope to see you soon.